There's Jory here this morning. Good morning, Jory. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. Good. I'm glad to have you here today. Thanks for joining us here this morning. As you can see, we got Robbie Brighton here today. Jory, the guy runs 172 miles like it's like we're going for lunch. I'm going to go around 172 miles today. So when we're talking to a guy like Robbie Brighton, Rich Ingram, these guys that get up and train for endurance, and we're talking nutrition, we're talking protein, and we got about 10 minutes today to lean into this. I know I've talked with John Anderson about training for endurance without fuel like carbohydrates. So there's many different ways to get here. But let's talk for the next 10 minutes about the power of protein with endurance, and what we as athletes want to be thinking about, Jory Jansen, when it comes to fuel and fueling ourselves for endurance athletics. And then Robbie and Rich, you guys got questions for Jory as well. Let's use this opportunity to hang out with Jory and talk about this. So Jory, talk about the power of protein and nutrition for our endurance athletes and that endurance mindset. Jory.
Yes, protein. I know a lot of people think that it's just for the bodybuilders, but more and more research shows that it's not. It's actually for everybody, but it's your why for taking it and for how much, when. And I think it's really important to understand that for endurance athletes, carbohydrate, definitely an important fuel source, but protein is what helps builds and repairs. So you need to get that in. It gives you that longer lasting form of energy as well.
And Johnny, I see you nodding there. I've talked a little bit, and I know you're a massive fan of protein, obviously, and we talk limited carbohydrates. But Jory made a comment there. I said more and more research is suggesting that there's a lot of value in protein and fats to fuel the body. Johnny, talk about how you train, how you teach folks the power of protein to achieve goals.
A protein is always going to be a staple. Excuse me. It's going to be like a foundation, because just like Jory said, it's you go without and you're going to have trouble. And so then from there, we know that macro has got to be there. Then obviously having a really good available version of it is helpful as well. And then from there, you got to figure out how everybody's body's different. Some people really do well with lots of carbohydrates. Some people don't. I had a guy, he's a swimmer. He's done multiple, he's training to just be the first man ever to swim the English Channel. And we did a whole bunch of tests on him. He performs so much better carbohydrate free, as with coconut oil being his primary energy source. It's not even comparable. We lined up the numbers. We did many tests. So what I'm getting at is that everybody's different. So he's going to swim the English Channel, and he hasn't had carbohydrate in a couple of years. So I guess what I'm getting at is that there is no formula. One thing that I do want to totally get behind Jory with is the fact that protein has to be a part of the equation, because if you don't have protein in the equation, your body's going to have a hell of a time of rebuilding muscle and recovering. And if you don't give it protein, guess what? It's going to go get its own protein, which is your muscle tissue.
Yeah,
I totally agree. And I think that when you're looking at endurance and the fuel sources, the substrate that you need, ultra endurance sport is going to need more than just carbohydrate. You're going to need long lasting fuel at some point, or you're not going to make it. Whereas if you're going for a morning jog, it's not that critical for the amount of time. Of course, you need the protein throughout the day. And the amount, quality, those are all important. And the sources can vary depending on how you choose to fuel your body and nourish it. But if you're ultra endurance, you're going to need a variety of sources of energy, not solely carbohydrate, even though that is a great quick source of energy for most people. But at some point during ultra endurance, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah, I got to be honest, Jory, and I'm going to speak for the normal man out here who's just getting up and getting rolling. We have been taught so much about carb fueling, carb loading, and I'm hearing you guys speak about, yeah, that's great, but you really need to eat that protein. That because we think of protein built muscle, but what you're saying, Jory, as much as anything, is that yes, you need the muscle, but it's going to build longevity into you as well. Richie and Robbie, as you guys are fueling yourselves, when you're looking at your plate, are you loading up on the rice and the pastas, or are you as much jumping into the steaks and the proteins like Jory and John are talking? Rich, Robbie.
I'm going to defer to Robbie. You take this one.
Rich knows I'm going to come up and upset things now. So like for me, and this is just a few good examples here you can look at, but for optimum performance in an endurance environment, carbohydrates are still king. There's been some research around athletes using ketosis and working, but what it does is it limits your top end gear. So you might be able to spend a longer time sat in like first gear. I don't drive, so also if the car analogy doesn't work, hopefully it does. But like you get stuck in first gear and you can't respond to spikes, you can't operate at a higher level. But people are finding they're having less GI issues. Okay, so it depends what's stopping you within a longer race. Over the course of my 24-hour record, I averaged 100 just under 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. There was 0 fat, 0 protein within that. It was carbohydrate gels, drinks, drink mixes, stuff like that, some caffeine. We go back to like 1988, Yanis Kouros, who's a Greek ultramarathon runner. They did a study on him running from Sydney to Melbourne, which is about 500 miles. And for 5 days straight, he averaged 135 grams of carbs an hour on the first day, 90 grams of carbs the whole way through. And we're seeing massive improvements in cycling, in endurance running, because of athletes being able to push the amounts of carbohydrate they can take over the course of their events. That said, if someone is struggling with that amount, if there's satiety issues, there's GI issues, one, I always advise people to slow down a little bit. But two, it might be that over the course of that, you just can't stomach the idea, and I'm saying this both physically and psychologically, of that many gels, of that many Myconite, Sour Patch Kids. You can, like, there's a variety of ways you can get them in, like a bit of jerky, some cheese. It helps you with your flavor fatigue. Your body's going to break it down and use it all the same. It's going to be a slightly more laborious method that it's going to use at that point. If you're in full-blown ketosis for a longer distance race like that, you just limit in you might be able to have a more even performance throughout, and it might even lead to your best performance to date. But for optimum performance, and I often defer to Professor Louise Burke's work with the Supernova studies over in Australia, primarily looking at race walkers, but they're still working at a reasonably high amount of VO2 max. They still found, and Louise, I think she admits herself, she went from pro to like swinging back towards a carbohydrate rich for optimum performance in endurance sports. I lean towards her studies as one of the key ones in showing us that I think we're still even finding the limits of carbohydrate issues with some events, with some of the cyclists now looking at 120, 130 grams of carbohydrate per hour within races like the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia. So I've gone against the party line there.
Well, and I want to jump in real quick and say I completely agree that it's with ketosis is not a high performance state. It's what we were doing with my client that's a swimmer in Iceland. We were basically finding a fuel source that was long burning, that was burning fast enough to keep him in that peak performance. And that's why coconut oil breaks down quickly for him, kept him in that state. So I totally agree. Removing carbohydrate to reach a state of ketosis, that is by no means going to put you in a performance state. It might give you some kind of lower level stability, but if you're looking to break records, I would never ever recommend you get yourself into ketosis and try to do it with anything endurance.
Yeah. Jory, when you're hearing this conversation happening right now and people come to you and say, hey, I need some help. I need some help eating. I want to go run a marathon. I want to go and do something with an endurance mindset involved. And I want to go and express my body for a long period of time. Are you naturally just rolling into, I use word traditional makeups, which is okay, Keith, eat your carbohydrates, eat your proteins, eat your fats, or are you taking the time to really understand what my goals are and then prescribing what I should be fueling to reach my goals? Or are we sitting back and being very generic, Jory?
You need to personalize. If you don't personalize, it's just a textbook message. And I agree that carbohydrate is still king in terms of long-term performance. And it's the combination and types of carbohydrates. Just like you train your mind, you train your physical body, you train your gut.
Not this kind of carbohydrate? Not this kind of carbohydrate, Jory?
And that won't be straight up carbs either, right?
That could work though.
So, but at some time, and I liked what Robbie said, I've had this coin for a long time. You can go through long periods of time with something and then you get flavor fatigue. And when you reach the flavor fatigue, then you've got a choice of, I don't need this. When you do need something versus getting in what you need. So I think it's important to have a variety of options always on hand. And excuse me, always trial a combination. So if you're having about 120 grams of carbohydrate, you probably want a few different sources, a couple of different sources coming in, because they will digest a little bit differently and then reach the way to break down. And then you've got that fuel available to you. It's all about energy availability for when you need it. So it's performance on demand. So there's a lot of factors. You're going to personalize carbohydrate intake. You're going to personalize your hydration. Some of that in terms of what makes up the hydration intake as well. You're going to personalize when the protein and fats come in, because they are not quick fuel sources. They take longer. They're not as efficient for quick energy. So if you were going to do something like a higher fat, that might help with training and adaptive training phases. But when it comes to performance on demand, for energy to be available, carbohydrate is still really important. Protein, I look at more as to build and repair, keeps you feeling fuller longer throughout the day. So part of the training program, but it's not everything. So you really want to look at the individual, the timing, the what, and the how much, I think is really important. So personalization is really important.
Yeah, we're hanging out with Keith, Jory, John, Marty, Robbie, and Rich Ingram here. Mornings Live with Keith and friends. We're wrapping up our protein break segment with Jory Jansen, our nutritionist here in the Business Athlete Performance Lab. Jory, you know what I love and hate about this whole thing at the same time? And I've talked with this with the team here. You really need to enjoy the process, because if you don't enjoy the process, it's going to frustrate the hell out of you. Right. And John talks about testing. And I know, Jory, you do with your clients, and Robbie and Rich, it's okay. This week, I'm going to eat 100 grams of carbs every single day and then go to my stuff. And the next week, I'm going to do 50 grams of this. If a human being can't enjoy that process, you're just going to frustrate the hell out of yourself. And I know I think I can speak for the average dude here who has always been searching for the black and white answer, but there actually isn't a black and white answer. It is an answer of process. It is an answer of talking to guys like Rob, talking to guys like Rich, talking to somebody like Jory and John, and figuring stuff out. Do you want to count macros? Do you want to just eat protein? Do you want to have carbohydrates? And that's what I love and hate about this. And I'm looking at you, Jory, to wrap up our segment. And it must drive you perhaps nuts, but also get a lot of joy when people come to you saying, Jory, can I get the magic bullet? And you're like, no, there is no magic bullet, Keith.
The magic bullet is figuring you out.
Yes.
So that's the magic bullet. So what's going to work really well for you may not work really well for someone else. And when you're beginning your journey, I always say everything's an experiment. So you can't do something wrong. It was an experiment. And did that work for you?
That's good. Yes.
And I think that when you look at elite level, those elite level athletes, you're not normal humans. It's just different. It's cool, but totally different. And so if you're looking at someone who's going to run their first half marathon, the fueling strategy, the nutrition strategy is a little bit different. Let's not count and micro compartment everything. Let's start with something. Whereas when you have the elite level, that's completely different. You've been training for years and years. What works, what doesn't work, who the big time researchers are. If you're going to go for protein, you're looking at Tipton and Stu Phillips. And if you're looking for overall sport nutrition, Louise Burke is amazing, especially endurance sport. So the research is all out there. Look at where you're at, where you're going to start. And even when I work with elite level athletes, pro athletes, I'm teaching them the same thing as I'm teaching someone who's a 16-year-old hockey player. It's get back to the foundation. Where are you at? What have you experienced? What works, what doesn't work? And let's start with one thing to move you to the next level to get you to where you want to be. So it's personalization always.
Awesome. We're hanging out with Jory, Keith, Christina, Marty, Rich, and Robbie. What's great about this, Jory, is that you didn't know coming into this conversation today that we really started the show about relatability and continue to make ourselves relatable to our audience, because we look at elite athletes, Jory. We look at these elite people and we don't think they put their pants on the same way as all of us. So when you're saying you're looking at Robbie Brighton, he's running 172 miles, Keith, you're probably not going to be eating the same as Robbie. So let's sit down and figure out your process. Let's learn what's going to work well for you instead of just saying, hey, do what Robbie does. So, Jory, thanks for hanging out with us this morning on Mornings in the Lab with Keith and Friends with our regular segment on the protein break. We got Jory here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Nation. We got a full-fledged performance dietitian, nutritionist joining the lab to bring your questions, answer questions, and give us the knowledge we all need to hit our big, audacious goals. Jory, one last comment from you before we say goodbye. Give us a nugget to hang on to do with this theme of performance, protein, and endurance today before we say goodbye. Jory Jansen.
All right, I don't know if I have any pearls of wisdom other than what everyone is unique. If we over macro everything, it's just going to mess with your head. Let's not do that. Let's figure out what's really important for you. What is the outcome that you want, and what the process is to reach that outcome. And everyone is uniquely different in that way, but yet everyone's similar. We all need fuel. We all need each other to support. And so I would just say, start to look at what is it that you need? Where are you starting at? And just go from there and find the right support network. That's always important.
Awesome. All right, Jory Jansen joining us here in the lab. She's back on Friday. The protein break every single day around 7:45 Central Time, 8:45 Eastern Time. Oh, Nation, listen to this.